Hey, my name is Jenna. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to go through how to embroider on a canvas bag. I love embroidery projects that you get to wear or use, so I thought a canvas bag would be a good one to teach you. First, let's go through the supplies you're going to need. So you will need a canvas bag or some other sort of like sturdy fabric, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. I think jean would also work. You'll need an embroidery hoop. They should only be a couple bucks at Michael's. You also need a needle. For this project, we're going to be doing 3-strand thread, so a needle that works with 3 strands. Along with that, thread, scissors, and I highly recommend a thimble, but it's not totally necessary. Another thing that I recommend is a water-soluble marker to mark on the fabric. But if this is not going to be a project you're going to keep and just practice, you could probably just use a pencil. Once you have all your supplies together, the next step is going to be to transfer your design onto your canvas bag. So with a lot of embroidery, you have pretty thin pieces of fabric, and you can put the fabric on top of the pattern and trace above it. Canvas is a little bit thicker, so I found that it's really hard to get a design to show through to be able to trace. There are a couple options you can then do. One involves a printer, so there are these sheets you can buy where you print out your design, stick it on, and rinse it. Or there's a stencil option, which I have another video showing you about how I designed a stencil that you can use to transfer designs onto thick fabric. I think the stencil is a great, no cost way to do it. But here what I'm gonna do, because it's pretty simple, I'm gonna be doing a leaf, so I'm going to actually be freehanding it. I'm not much of an artist, but this one is simple enough that it's no problem. I'm gonna draw on this eucalyptus leaf using this water-soluble pen. So it's basically just an oval with a line down the middle, and the benefit of the water-soluble pen is that the markings come off with water when I'm done stitching. Quickly, here's the front of the bag. I want to show you those wildflowers, which has a repeating pattern, and the stencil really helped keep consistency across that pattern. Okay, so once your design is traced, then you're going to put your bag into an embroidery hoop. Some tricks about the embroidery hoop. It is, with normal fabric, it's pretty easy to get it in and get it tight enough. Here, with the thicker fabric, it takes a little bit to get it tight enough. So I would start with the hoops pretty close together as is, and then when you combine them, it stays nice and tight. Putting the hoop on is pretty straightforward, but as a reminder, you're gonna separate the 2 hoops. The smaller hoop is gonna go inside the bag. Like I said, it helps if you start out with the top layer hoop being a little bit tighter. So I actually put it pretty tight here and smoothed down the bag to make sure that there's no bumps, and then just stretched it over. And then after that, you can just tighten the nozzle at the top. When you stretch it, you want to make sure that the fabric doesn't get distorted, that you have a nice flat layer on top there, and you want it tight like a drum. When you buy thread at the store, it should be under $1, around 80 cents, and at least the DMC thread, and it will come wrapped up like this. I'm using DMC 3817 for this. It's sort of like a eucalyptus color, or at least for this project I'm doing, hopefully eucalyptus leaves, so we'll see how close it gets. But one thing I learned is that if you buy these little, they're called bobbins, buy these little bobbins and wrap the thread around it out of this package. You don't have to have a bobbin, but it helps the thread stay orderly and not get knotted in on itself. When you are measuring out your thread, I usually use about 100 centimeters, which I have discovered is about an arm's length-ish. So I will unwind my thread from my bobbin, measure it about like this, and then cut it. The thread comes wrapped with 6 individual strands. For canvas, I recommend doing 3 strands. So you will separate the thread by grabbing 3 in each hand and then just pulling and letting it unravel, which is super satisfying. But you want to do it somewhat controlled or slow, because as the bottom spins, it can spin up on itself and get a little bit tangled. And we want to avoid that. You see that little knot there. Once you have your 3 pieces of floss separated, we're then just gonna thread the needle. So you're gonna take your needle that's marked for 3 strands or 3 pieces of floss. It should say on the package which one that is if you bought a pack of needles. I'm gonna use a needle threader. So how this tool works is, instead of having to get the strands straight into the needle, I put the needle on the threader, loop the strands through this larger hole in the threader. Like that, and then it will slide onto the needle. So there are a few different ways to knot a thread, but I'm going to show you my favorite, which is to take the end of the thread in one hand, put it near the top of the needle, and then pull the thread perpendicular to the needle and wrap it around 3 times. You're going to hold the wrap that you just made around the needle with one hand and pull the needle through, and that will give you a knot that's a little bit bigger than just tying a basic knot, which should keep your thread nice and secure against the canvas. Then you're just going to take a pair of scissors and snip the tail. Okay, now your needle is knotted, you're ready to get started. Here I'm going to be using the fishbone stitch, which I think just looks really pretty for leaves. While this is a little bit of a refresher on the fishbone stitch, I want to get more into the specifics of stitching on canvas. So one of the things to keep in mind about the difference between stitching on canvas and stitching on typical fabric is that it's really hard to see where the needle's going to come through. So there's going to be a lot of trial and error of making sure that you're poking, up and in the right position. And I think here there's just, a good reminder is to go slow and be patient. Thankfully, canvas is a really sturdy fabric, so if you've poked up a few times and you need to go back down, or if you've done a few stitches that you kind of regret the placement and you want to redo it, canvas doesn't show the holes. You can easily kind of rub out the holes and move on with your work. It's certainly not going to be ruined. Throughout this, you will see me, poking through a bunch of times as you see here to make sure that I'm getting the needle in the right spot. I'm doing a fishbone stitch here, so I started with one center stitch, and now I'm doing alternating stitches on either side of that center stitch, going down around the side of my pattern, and each time crossing the stitch on the opposite side of the center line from the side that I came up on. That creates this nice interwoven pattern that I think really looks like a leaf and is very secure on the canvas. I think there are a number of stitches that would work great on canvas, but you just want to stay away from the more delicate stitches like long satin stitches or woven rows, so you're not limiting the utility of the bag. Another reminder with canvas, or another tip, is to keep checking in the bag to check the back of your thread. With such a thick fabric, it's easy to miss if thread didn't pull all the way through, or if there's a snag or a loop that you didn't notice. So I think that flipping it over and routinely just double checking that the thread on the back looks the way that you expect it to will save you a lot of pain. Here that I reach for a thimble a good amount. That's another big tip I have for embroidering canvas bags. This material is thick and needles are only so sharp. I really encourage you to consider using a thimble to push your needles through, especially in the areas like what I'm dealing with here where it's both double thick and the edging is kind of folded over, so now I have 3 levels of canvas to get through. You can certainly, work on projects longer if your fingers are in good shape. So using a thimble can help with that. on knotting your thread at the end. So as you may know, when you embroider on decorative pieces, sometimes you can just sort of thread the floss through the back stitches of the piece because no one's going to be touching it. But here, this bag is meant to be utilized. So I'm doing knots within, one of the last stitches. So going under the stitch, pulling it up, and then before the loop gets pulled all the way, I loop my needle back through to create 2 knots. I found this method to be both easy and really sturdy. From there, you can just snip the tail. I do it relatively close, but I know that if you keep it a little bit longer, it's even more secure, so that's of course up to you. To take the hoop back off when you're done, you can, if it's too tight, loosen up that screw a little bit, but otherwise it should just pop right off. Okay, there you have it. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful and want to see how this project turns out, subscribe. Thanks. I'll see you in the next one.